Welcome to the Derek Diamond Experience podcast, where every week I take a look into the world of film and television with those who have lived it and experienced it. I am your host, Derek Diamond. First of all, I want to thank those who are watching on Facebook Live. This is actually a first for me. I've never done a live interview before, but I'm actually really excited about it because joining me on today's episode is former lawyer turned documentary filmmaker, Mr. Cam Cowan. How are you, sir?
I'm great, Derek. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I just finished watching your documentary, Madagascar, about half an hour before we started. So I've got a good fresh take on it. We were actually talking before we actually started recording. There's something, and I don't know if you agree with me on this, but there's something that's really fascinating about the documentary way of storytelling, because you get that, I mean, you get raw emotion from a narrative sometimes, but I feel like you get it much more from a documentary because you're getting a real story.
No, I do agree with that. I love film like you. I love film. I love all genres of film. All of them. I just cannot watch enough. But the thing about documentaries that does appeal to me is this point that I think with most of us, maybe every one of us, when we see something that is real, even when we watch narrative, even when we watch fictional, the magic of that is we suspend judgment and we feel that we're in it in some way. But with a documentary, it's more primal. And, I know that the reactions of people who have seen this film, Madagascar, are deep and sort of rooted in their senses, something that grabs them, and they can't just let it go by saying, oh, well, that was a great story, but it was fiction. It really does grab people, as a good documentary should. I mean, there are all sorts of documentaries, right? There are entertainment documentaries about rock bands and performers, and then there's sort of investigative documentaries, which is one of the last bastions of long-form journalism now. And when you have that, particularly when it involves characters, when it involves real people, I think it can be much more powerful than even a high-budget, big studio narrative.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And also, talking about your film a little bit, and I know we'll get a little bit more into it as we go, but when you hear stories like this documentary, it's one thing to read about it in an article online or in a newspaper, but to actually see the events happening, I think offers a much different perspective, because I'm a very visual learner. I learn by watching and I learn by doing. Mm-hmm. Seeing the things that these people are going through is mind-blowing. And it's one thing, you kind of know about it because you'll read it, but it's just like the visual aspect of it is just on a whole different level.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the power of it, of a documentary, particularly when you're following people. We knew we wanted to follow real people. We had a big political sort of perspective, a thesis, but that we tested along the way and modified as new information came out. But we knew that we wanted to follow the lives of at least three. Originally, we were thinking four, and the rough cut had four families. And the purpose of that is sort of what you're getting at, I think, in that when we read about famine in sub-Saharan Africa, or a natural disaster in Haiti, and then we see the numbers: so many died, or so many suffering from starvation, so many out of house. The numbers become overwhelming. and we tend to just move on. I mean, it's human nature. It's the way we are. It's like, oh, that's terrible, and you move on. But when we can relate to what's happening to real people and tell those stories, it sits with us deeper, and we tend not to move on. We tend to think about it a little bit more, and even begin to act. If we come to a conclusion that those people we just saw, that we were allowed to get into their lives, for those people, if they can muster compassion in us, then we tend to act. And that was the whole thing, that we wanted as many people as possible to see this movie, but we actually wanted people to think about what had happened and what, if anything, can be done about it, by portraying the lives and the struggles and the hopes and the joy of these real people.
Now, I do want to get into how you found these people and their reaction to when you guys told them that you wanted to do this. But I got to ask, what was it that made you want to essentially change careers and do this documentary?
I think like most people who go to law school, who want to become lawyers, there's some sort of social justice rationale, regardless of your political stripe. You actually believe that if you can study the law and practice law, even if you're working in a big corporate law firm, there are things you can do to advance our society in some way. I think a lot of lawyers lose sight of that, after they start practicing law by the pressures of life and everything. But I think we all start that. And I started that way. That's why I wanted to go to law school. And my first few years of practicing law, I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity on a pro bono basis to present death penalty defendants in appellate litigation, so people on death row in appellate litigation. And that was an awakening. I really got to see up close sort of the wheels of injustice working, and it touched me to the bone. So I knew that I wanted to continue on with things like that, although not death penalty work. But I knew I wanted to keep going on with that. I continued to practice law, got married, had a family, but I always did pro bono work. And my wife and I started a human rights study clinic at my law school, the University of Virginia School of Law, and kept up with that all the time, and that was important to us. But I reached a point where I was enjoying practicing law less. I didn't feel that the things I was doing on the pro bono side and for social justice were really making that much of a difference. And so I wanted to. And as I said, I've always enjoyed film. Some of my biggest heroes are documentary filmmakers, just because of their courage and commitment to truth-telling. And so I decided that I was going to leave law and learn how to make a documentary film, and spent quite a while in that process. I was very fortunate to run into and find a lot of people who, including former lawyers who turned documentary filmmakers, who just anything I wanted, whatever help they could give me. It was totally generous, amazing, and really helped me out, including learning how to operate a camera and learning sound equipment and all of that. I watched thousands of documentary films. I talked to filmmakers. And I had already started So Hey Productions, which was a production company that was going to be the vehicle for all this. And soon I was attending one of the human rights study clinic presentations by the law school students, and they study one country every year, and over almost 15 years they had studied countries like Sierra Leone and Sri Lanka and Egypt and Uganda and China and India. They've gone all over. And this year they said they were going to focus on Madagascar. And I remember thinking, Madagascar, what are you doing? This is supposed to be a serious human rights thing. And they really, they thought I was pretty ignorant for somebody who had been around, and just explained it to me, educated me about it. Part of their program is they go to a country for 3 weeks over winter break to do primary research, and they come back and give a presentation to the faculty and student body. And I always go to those, and during that presentation, I was just stunned by what I saw. And it really got to me. I wasn't particularly looking for a project, but a particular project. But what really struck me is, why did I not know about this? Why did I not know about the real Madagascar? How did it get that way? And is there anything that can be done? Because it was just stunning. What I heard was that at that time, Madagascar was the poorest country on the planet. And just think about that. That's extraordinary. So we in our hemisphere often think of Haiti, and Haiti has terrible poverty. But the population of Madagascar at that time was close to 25 million people. It's the fourth largest island in the world. It's a huge country the size of France. Half the population are children. So half of the population are under the age of 18, and half of those children are stunted, are chronically malnourished. And it's just like, how did I not know about this? And so I started to dig in and do my own research. And one of the things I found, I mean, there are a myriad of reasons, but one of the things I found was the dysfunction politically in Madagascar, the national political dysfunction. Since it was a French colony for 60 years, from 1900 to 1960, after 1960, they had a series of almost every 10 years there was some unconstitutional change of government, whether a little violent. There was never a full civil war, but a little violent or peaceful. But there was something always happened, and the poverty continued to get worse and worse. So it's you saw in the film the statement that it's the only non-war country that's poorer today than it was in 1960. And so digging into it, I did see there was national political dysfunction, but one of the things I learned was a participation of the international community in this poverty. Now, the international community does a lot of great things, the World Bank and the IMF and all that, absolutely essential things, and UNICEF. But when you looked at sort of particular decisions that politicians were making, as opposed to these global finance organizations and aid organizations, it was stunning to me. And one in particular, well, two in particular, one 2002 and 2009, relating to this one millionaire who ended up being the mayor of the capital city and then ran for president in 2002 and rejected the outcome of the first round of elections and started a mini civil war. He was a favorite of the United States and many of the Western countries, so ultimately he got their support and took over. But it became sort of autocratic. And in 2009, through a series of things, which when people see the film, they'll see, there were street protests. And the street protests ended violently, and among other things, caused him to be ousted. He actually resigned. He voluntarily resigned. He later said there was a gun at his head, but the U.S. ambassador said there was nobody there. and but that triggered the United States and most of the rest of the world to impose universal sanctions. So in 2009, you have the poorest country in the world, half the population children, half the children grossly malnourished, and world governments impose universal sanctions on this country. At that time, that country depended between 60 and 70%, numbers vary, on foreign aid for the delivery of all of its social services. So this is non-humanitarian aid. Just regular foreign aid, they depended on that to 60, 70% of providing healthcare, education, access to food, access to water, those kinds of things. And that was immediately wiped out. So in my mind, it's my country sort of, doing this wrong. It's 2009. The president of the country is Barack Obama, whose father was born in the continent of which Madagascar is a part, and Hillary Clinton, who has dedicated her life to women and children, and they make that decision. And I just couldn't understand what happened. It didn't make sense to me. So I kept digging and digging and digging, and really developed some thoughts on it, and knew that I really wanted to tell this story. I wanted to get it out because it was something that I just did not know, and I thought people should know, and so wanted to proceed with the film. It was later when I knew that I wanted to also follow some families to bring the truth, the reality of their existence to the screen.
Well, and kind of going back to you mentioning that Madagascar is poorer now than it was in 1960, I think that was the most mind-blowing stat to me, is that you have the graphic on the screen that says in 1960 poverty was at X percent. I can't remember what the exact number is. And then it just gets higher and higher. And I'm just like, How is this happening? And I will say, and because I think it has something to do with what's going on with us as a country right now, watching the footage from the protest really that kind of hit home with me. Like that's been what's going on here.
A lot of people have commented recently that it reminded them of the Lafayette Park emptying by the police and military when Donald Trump wanted to walk across the park to hold up a Bible in front of a church. Mm-hmm. They shot rubber bullets and tear gas, and people were dispersed by heavily armed police and military, and by a a billionaire president who probably has some undemocratic leanings, just like Marc Ravaloman in Madagascar. So totally, really different, but people are seeing the parallels here. And while we will never become one of the world's poorest countries, there are, this all relates to the decisions individuals make, right? Mm-hmm. And poverty is not fate. Poverty is not inevitable. Poverty can be eliminated. Certainly, extreme poverty can be eliminated, but that just takes sort of decision making by people who want to do that and the willpower to do it. There are enough resources around the planet to do that. But when you see the political, and this is one of the things we tried to pull out in the film, when you see the political decision making. There it is. There's the problem, right? It's about them. It's not about the people. And they may start out that it's really about the people, and they want to represent the people and improve the lives of the people. And just along the way, they change. And in Madagascar, most of the people who have become president, certainly most who have run for president, say they want to make change, never did. Got in, never did, and became rich in the process. And would do anything to get reelected. So it's we may be getting numb to that. We may be saying, well, that's politics. That's what politicians do. I hope we're not. I hope we can really think about what politicians should be doing, and not what they do, and normalize that. And I think there are lessons in at a different scale what happened to Madagascar and what's happening in many countries around the world today.
Yeah, another thing that blew my mind, it was, I think the first, I believe her name was Lynn, the first subject that you talked to, when she mentioned that she worked for what was the equivalent of 28 cents. And I'm like, wait, what? Like 28 cents? Like, and it's one of those, and you alluded to it before, it's, you don't know what you don't know. And it's ignorance, yes, but not the negative type of ignorance, just because you don't, what can you do, or what do you know if you don't know? So I think, you taking this on, and really any documentary filmmaker who feels that passionately about a subject that they want to bring to light like this, I commend you guys for.
Well,
110%.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And you see someone like Lynn, and so she works all day long. She's got all these children that she's raising by herself, and what she makes a day can buy 2 cups of rice. So it's no wonder why children are grossly malnourished, and also like, rice is bad for your blood pressure, and almost every Malagasy person has blood pressure problems because rice is a staple. They live on rice.
Yeah.
It's really important to their diet. But when you see Lynn, as well as the other women, and hear those stories, and then watch how they live, and watch how they take care of their children, and watch how they have joy in their life and sorrow in their life, and how they struggle, I think it causes us to really think deeply about the others, right? Those less fortunate, because they do get along. They will get along. They're committed to their children. They will survive. And I think I took away really enthusiastic, re-energized about the human spirit after being there. It's not demoralized at all. I felt really good because I could see at its very rawest nature the strength and resiliency of the human spirit.
It kind of reminds me, and this is trivial compared to what you witnessed, but I think it's a good analogy. So earlier this year, I was training for a 15K. So I would wake up really early in the morning to run. And there was one day, this was, I think, 2 weeks before the run actually happened. I'm running through one of the neighborhoods near my house, and I'm not feeling it. My legs feel like lead, and I'm just like, man, I just don't really feel like running today. And then across the street from me, I saw this older woman, and like the canes you have that you can wrap around your wrist.
Yeah.
She's out walking on the sidewalk, and I'm like, okay, I need to stop complaining about myself and keep going, because if she's out here, at 4 a.m. walking, then I should be able to run. So I mean, it's seeing stuff like that. You think that are just insurmountable things that you can't imagine living through, but they still survive, and they still go on, and they still, and it's you see it in the documentary too. There are positive aspects. Like, it's not a completely negative story, and you see the positive aspects of it, and it really makes you think. I'm pretty lucky to be in the position that I'm in.
Yeah. No, I love the comparison, because that's right, and I don't think about that much, but that sounds exactly right to me. That beyond the sort of mission lessons that I had, there are just these personal lessons about fortitude and commitment, and what it takes. When you see Tina, right, working in the quarry all day long, breaking rock. To me, the reason I wanted to be in that quarry and film it, and we actually had a fourth person and family from there that we ultimately had to cut. But that quarry, to me, what I thought about, other than the amazing visuals and the jagged shades of gray, cut through a hillside, was the closest analogy I had. What came to mind would be like a life sentence of hard labor breaking rock, right? Like some sort of chain gang or something like that. And for them, that is a life sentence of hard labor breaking rock. and this is what they do, and this is their normal life. But it really is like an economic prison for them, and there literally is no way out. And so they struggle mightily to get their kids educated, right? They're spending most of their money on education, because education is not free, and they spend most of it on that for their children to get them educated. And I kept thinking about this, even though with whatever degree they get, unless they go to college, and then unless they're lucky getting out of college, her kids will probably be back in the quarry, just like she was, because her parents still work in the quarry.
That was nuts too.
Yeah, but nevertheless, she's still going to fight, because she's still going to want to get them an education. She had a fourth grade education. She didn't want that for her kids. She wanted them to get educated, and all the women. And that was one of the things, right? So we were basically following three women and their families, and that wasn't intended. I wanted to follow families, but one of the things I learned quickly in Madagascar is it is the women that's keeping society together there, because of their commitment to their children. And poverty affects women and children the most. And these just seeing these women in action, so dedicated to their children, was really inspiring. And when I was on the film festival circuit and doing Q&As afterward, one way or another, I would say something like, I was just blown away by these women, who were amazing and so dedicated. And you'd see all the women in the audience say, "What? Well, of course." What are you talking about? Say, right, yes, yeah, right. But that is one of the interesting things. It was the women who just emerged as family leaders, and not just family leaders, because certainly there were male family leaders, but it was just their forward-looking nature, their commitment to trying to have their children have a better future than they've had.
I can't remember if it's the same woman, but I know in one scene in the quarry there was a woman actually breastfeeding her child while working in the quarry. I was just like, man, that's...
Yeah. It was a different woman, but there are dozens of them. That's what they must do. They've got children, but they've got to work. So they'll bring their children in. Early on in filming, we spent a lot of time in the quarry, and we were really warmly welcomed. We made many friends in the quarry. Really, just remarkable people. Malagasy people themselves are remarkably friendly. It's dangerous to make a generalization like that, but it's just my experience. And warm and engaging. And we were totally embraced by people of privilege, right? People from the United States, the wealthiest country in the world, and I was just treated like a son or a brother, or an uncle there, and people insist on, bringing me home to have meals and do all this, not expecting a thing just because they were remarkably lovely people. But we found there was a woman who had twins, very young twins, and she had to bring them to the quarry, and her mother worked in the quarry. And so would help with the twins. And, it was just this scene of seeing the grandmother and the mother and the two infants. And she was, breastfeeding one and then handing to the mother and breastfeeding the other. And then 3 months later, we came back and I went to talk to them, and there was only one twin, and the other had died. And so, I wanted to understand that, and it was, her was just like, well, this this is what happens here.
Yeah.
I can't be too upset. I have to break rock. I have to take care of the one child who has survived, and it was heart-wrenching.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that you just have no time to grieve. For us, that's unthinkable. Right. But over there, it's just like, it's just part of what goes on.
Absolutely.
So talk to me about, you have this idea, you learn all this information, and you want to know more, and you decide that you're going to make this documentary happen. How did you meet the subjects that you featured in the documentary, and what was the starting process of getting it off the ground?
Yeah, really fun question. And as hard as it was, and the conditions were, and it was brutal. I mean, I don't think when I was actually filming, I don't think I got more than 3 or 4 hours sleep a night ever, just because everything that had to be done and all of that. So really, really demanding. But because of the people, the warmth and richness of the people, there were way more fun moments than disturbing moments. It was a process. I knew I wanted to meet some people and talk to them. I knew I'd have to be very selective, so I wanted to find some people who would be expressive, and I knew I was going to have to follow them. And, I was thinking of 3 years, because if you follow anybody for 3 years, some stories will evolve. Maybe not in a country like Madagascar, but I did want to follow for a period of time. And I didn't know if anybody would even consider doing that, since everybody's working so hard. And I knew that I couldn't pay anybody. Documentary film ethics are, you just not going to do that. And I was clear with everybody that that was a constraint. So if they were going to, help us and with our story and let us follow them and go in, as you see in the film, right into their most intimate moments, then they were going to have to do it because they thought the project worthwhile. To a person, and nobody asked for money, not one person. They really believed in the project. And in fact, I got a fascinating story about Deborah. So there's Lynn, we talked about, who does the clothes washing, Tina in the quarry, and Deborah, who now lives in the countryside, about that. But I went in, I talked to people. I found a great initially interpreter who became my fixer, who became the assistant director, brilliant Malagasy guy that actually studied American culture at George Washington University, got a master's, so really sharp guy, and has become a very close friend. But he was great because he came from not great circumstances, as he says, because of his mother. He got his education, and he helped me find some people there who could help with technical parts and of the shoot, and then as we went around, we just started to meet people and talk to people, and it took a while, took a long time. I would be filming while we're talking. We'd ask them if we could do that, so I could go back and look at it and hear the backstory and see them and see, is this, should these dates? But when I said, when I told people why I was doing this and what I wanted to with it, everybody said, how can I help? What can we do? And part of it is I do want people to know about Madagascar, the real Madagascar, because there will be another unconstitutional change of government in Madagascar. There just will be. There's no political stability. There's no political foundation, their true democratic foundation, and there will be another one. And what will the reaction of the international community be then? And I wanted this film to be a document that could discuss what happened in 2009 when the international community made the decision to pull the plug on the and so hopefully that we can reach enough people, and I'm hoping that we can show the movie in the Senate and the House here too, and get it to some decision makers and say, what did we do? What did we do in 2009 when President Obama was in the White House and Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State? And no matter who's in charge, let's think about not using universal sanctions. I had the thesis that what the international community did in 2009 was in fact a human rights violation itself. As we developed information and talked to people, we saw that in fact that was a conclusion reached by one of the UN special rapporteurs and professor of human rights law. So when I tell people, that it's my country and I'm concerned about what my country does as the leading country of the West, they know, right? Because people depend on the United States there. They depend on the aid there. They depend on participation in the African Growth and Opportunity Act there for their textile factories that employs hundreds of thousands of people. And they're concerned about being critical of the United States. But, when I was saying, I'm going to do this because I think it's important because there will be another coup, and everybody said there will be, of course there will be. Let's not repeat our mistakes and let's get out there. So people were amazing. Deborah was an interesting case. I had learned from the law school students about the child sex work that was prevalent there, as it is in many countries that are that poor, and in many cases, sort of family-sponsored child sex work because there are no options. There are just no options. I wanted to understand that better. Why was that in a country where actually prostitution is legal for women over 18? And so at first I thought, and I did learn about a family that had a story, and I wasn't necessarily interested in filming it and going into it, but I did want to meet them. And they worked in another quarry, when I was on the ground there and sort of got my legs under me after a couple of trips and met all these amazing people, I said, I'm not going to do this. I don't want to even be perceived as exploiting that issue. But I had talked to an NGO and in terms of trying to find people to consider to interview, and the people of the NGO, who are just amazing, great public servants, said, "Now somebody told us that you had been interested in talking to a child sex worker, but decided against it." And I explained why. And they said, "Well, there's this girl who was 17 at the time who had been a child sex worker, but she was part of our program to pull these girls out of sex work and put them back into school. And it was a program that was funded by the U.S. government. And when they found her, all she had wanted to do was get an education, and they found her, and she got into the program which was terminated when aid was terminated in 2009. But they said she did a video for us when she was in school because she wanted people to understand that she wasn't ashamed. She was ashamed, but she wanted people to understand why she did what she did and how fortunate they are to be in school. And you should meet her. And I said, okay, and then we found, with their help, found the social workers who found her. And then she and her mother and her brother came in, and I talked with them. And when we got to her experience with sex work, she just broke down and cried. I said, okay, fine, we're not going to do this. And then heard back later through the social workers that no, in fact, she really wants to do this. She thinks it's important. Okay, brought him back, and same thing happened. So I said, no, we're not going to do this. Next trip, social workers came to me and said, no, she really wants to do this. She wants you to come out to their home. And their home is the home you saw in the film, which was just it's like desperate.
Mm-hmm.
A little shack that they couldn't afford, right? And so okay, we set up the equipment, we go through everything and start talking, and then I get to the point about her experience with sex work, and she broke down and cried. And I said, okay, I'm just not, I'm not going to do this. This would be exploiting her. And so we began to pack up, and she put her hand on my shoulder and said, no, I really want to do this. I want to help girls who were like me. And we went back and did it. And then, as you saw in the film, it's one of the more fascinating arcs of a character, going from where she was to where she ended up several years later.
Well, that's powerful stuff, because you got to think that has to be one of the worst or most difficult things to talk about, and the fact that she was able to do it because she believed in it. That's right. Got to be a powerful feeling on your end.
It really was. She's just a remarkable young woman. I mean, just remarkable, and it felt great. It was encouraging, right? So yes, I often have to remind myself that with all those sleepless nights and all of the difficulties and everything that was going on, and the commitment that I had made to make a big film, as hard as that was, when I would go back and visit with these amazing people, it was just like, well, of course we're going to do this. There's no question. Full speed ahead. They deserve this, and they don't give up. I'm not going to give up on this, and to a great extent, they kept us moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioning that is actually a great segue to my next question. Out of all the things that you filmed, because you captured a lot of content and a lot of stories, what to you was the most challenging aspect of making this a reality?
Boy, good question. Right from the beginning, so I knew, and a lot of my filmmaking friends were telling me that I shouldn't do what I'll call a hybrid film, that I shouldn't do a political essay film and a character film. Do one or the other. And that's typically how they are done. So you can have a film like, Gibney's Taxi to the Dark Side, and that's a very high level and amazing film, Academy Award winner, but it's not. You don't develop characters in that kind of film. You develop. You have a character film. You develop the characters, and they tell the story, and whatever comes out of that sort of goes to a higher level understanding of the viewer, and hopefully the higher level story comes through. I knew, though, that the political story was complicated and buried. It wouldn't come out in the character study. And I found these documents, these U.S. Embassy cables, and I knew that I wanted to tell that story, but yet I knew I had to tell the story of these women. And so the hard part was I had an idea of how we were going to do it. So we have an arc of the political story, which did rely on archival footage and going back in time, but having that go over the course of the film, the political story unfold over the course of the film, while the stories of the three characters were unfolding over the course of the film. So I had that idea, and so yes, there were a lot of hurdles and physical barriers and everything to the actual film production in Madagascar. But when we sat in the editing room, sort of with this idea, putting that all together and making that work was really difficult. So when people were saying, don't do it, it's not going to be good, I get it, and it's real hard. But I was committed to that. I really felt that I would come up short going just one way or the other. And so that was the hard part, trying to put all that together, and hopefully we succeeded. We had a 2-hour rough cut that I really liked. We had a 4.5-hour rough cut, cut it down to 2 hours, and I really liked the 2-hour rough cut. And it was much fuller story. It had another character, but it was way too long for a documentary film like this. And so as we were cutting down, we actually got, so part of the problem was weaving the political story and the three character story all together. But as we were cutting down, part of the problem was actually cutting it down.
Yeah.
Like every documentary filmmaker for sure who does an investigative kind of film has that problem. And we actually, at the end, my lead editor Tiffany and I, we challenged each other to a competition at the 2-hour to cut it down. We were shooting for 82 to 85 minutes, and we both got down to about 100 minutes, but we were so invested in it at the time. She was my co-producer as well, that we went and got a consulting editor who really helped us, and it was a really good thing to do. Very cost effective, very efficient. And she came in, and we told her what our objective was, and she really helped. So it was remarkable.
Well, and I think, going off of that point about the political aspect as well as the story of the three women, in a way it's two different stories, but they do intertwine because the political aspect does affect the story of the three women. So in a way it isn't, it does, go together. So I think, that was the right decision to keep both, because you see how this broader story affects the individual who lives in that area that's being affected. So
absolutely right. Great observation. We couldn't convey the real story of those characters if we weren't also conveying the political story. Absolutely right.
Yeah. Shannon Williams in the Facebook live chat, he asked, where and when can we see the film?
Wow, thank you. The film is going to be released on Amazon Prime and Docurama on June 26th.
Fantastic.
And then we're going to be following up shortly thereafter on iTunes and Google Play and several other streaming services.
Well, I would highly recommend that everybody watch it because, I did an interview last week with two documentary filmmakers who actually, they're part of the LGBTQ community, and they made a documentary about these two friends who grew up, practically next door to each other, and they were both transgender and came out at the same time. And then going from that to watching this, it's like back to back, gut punching documentary. So it's been an interesting couple of weeks. So I do appreciate, the opportunity to watch an advanced version of it. And it was really powerful stuff.
Thank you, Derek, very much. And thanks so much for being interested in it. And I hope that, it will matter. We've also created a charity called Madakids.org, and because a lot of the times, I actually saw this in film festivals. Come out of the film festival, people would say, "Well, okay, but how can we help?" Right, and that's just a natural reaction. And people can make contributions to Madakids.org. $1, as you see in the film, can provide a week's worth of food. And so we connected up with Pedro Peca's NGO, Akamaso, where 100% of what people contribute go there, and 100% of that goes to the children in Madagascar.
That's fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic. As we start to wrap up here, what is, and I always like to end interviews with filmmakers on this, what is one piece of advice you could give to someone who wants to make a documentary film?
Great question. Well, the classic advice is only make a film that you're passionate about, and I think that is absolutely right, because it's so hard. It's so hard. That you're always going to blow your budget, you're always going to blow your time schedule. It's going to always take longer than you think, and it can be very hard. But a piece of advice someone gave me early on, which I think is great, is when you have your vision, stick to it. Even if you've got a multi-year project, and even if you're running into trouble, and even if things, stay to your vision. Of course, you're going to learn things and adjust, but stay to your vision. Don't compromise. And that's the best advice I got. I thought about it a lot. I kept writing it down. And I think that's the best advice I could give to someone starting out making documentary films.
Absolutely. And Bill Lyons also asks in the Facebook chat, have you taken the film to any festivals?
We have. So we had a wonderful festival run in 2018, 2019. And there's about 35 or more festivals, I think, in the United States and in Europe. And we won over 20 awards, which was really great.
That's awesome.
For Best Feature Documentary, Best Cinematography, Best Editing, Best Director. And that was important, right? I mean, in the festivals, I saw so many really compelling films, narrative and documentary, in festivals by indie filmmakers who will never see the light of day. Yeah, and or it will be just sort of on YouTube or something like that. Now that could be very effective, but we were just very fortunate to get the awards, because then that means sales agents will want to talk with you. If you're starting out and you're indie and you're doing something that's a little different, you sort of need to be successful on the film festival circuit. So we were extremely fortunate, and then we ended up with a great distributor, Global Digital Releasing. So couldn't be happier about that.
And last question, do you have any website or social media that you'd like to plug so the viewers and the listeners can follow you?
Yeah, please. And thank you to all of the viewers and listeners at Sohei Productions. Sohei is Sohei, Sohei Productions. That'll get you to our Facebook and Instagram, and at Cam Cowan Film will get you to our tweets.
Fantastic. And in closing, if you want to follow my show on social media, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at D Diamond Podcast. You can find past episodes on all podcasting platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. Thank you to the Unicorn Wranglers for providing the theme music for the podcast. You can check out all their music on Apple Music, Google Play, and Spotify. Cam, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview. And as I mentioned before we started, thank you for being the guinea pig for my first live show. I thought this was really fantastic, so thank you.